Hello, friend. Whether you are joining us live or you're watching this later on the internet, you have found yourself tuned into the next episode of the Sharing Music series. My name is Jonathan Pape, and I am part of the Dedham School of Music. On behalf of all of us, thank you for being here. The Sharing Music is about people who have chosen to make music a part of their lives. Some of the folks who are involved may live down the street from you, while others you may be introduced to for the first time. In previous episodes, our guests have talked about how they approach their favorite instrument, the styles of music they play, and how they approach their craft. Tonight, we're going to talk about being a fan of music, all the way from listening to everything you can get your hands on to being critical. Our guest tonight has some experience in being a fan and being critical of music. He has covered and reported on music and the arts throughout New England and beyond. He has reviewed modern rock, classic rock, punk rock, and on more than one occasion, he sent his audience left of the dial. He's here to talk about discovering, being a fan, and covering one of his favorite bands, Pink Floyd. Please welcome Mr. Jim Sullivan. Jim.
Thank you, Johnny. Very kind of you for that introduction, and I think most of that is true.
Most of it is indeed true.
Well, yes, it is.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. So, For the folks tuning in and watching us live, Jim has been nice enough to also offer to take some questions tonight. So we will. My colleague, Mr. Monahan, who's watching behind the scenes, and I will be watching any and all things that folks might want to ask, might want to learn. But we're going to let Jim drive the discussion, and if questions come up that are applicable, I will do my best to feed them to him. Otherwise, we'll try to circle back, time permitted, and ask them of him then. So, with that in mind, I am fortunate enough to get the first question of you, and I wondered if you could set the scene for us and talk a little bit about who you were, what you were listening to right before you discovered Pink Floyd.
Well, in the early 70s, I was a rock fan, a top 40 fan, but top 40 was often very good in those days. And I was beginning to read the rock press, rock magazines, some of which exist, well, few of which exist now, Rolling Stone, Crawdaddy, Fusion, Rock Scene, and others. And through reading those magazines, they exposed me to bands that I hadn't heard of and discovered. And that was sort of a little bit of an eye-opener that there was a wide world of music that I wasn't hearing on my radio. And that world of music was essentially, rock music, if you will, I mean, for lack of a better term, but not really the kind of expansive conceptual music that Pink Floyd did. I was only vaguely aware of it until the big record, The Dark Side of the Moon. And that's kind of what we're kicking off this with. I think some talk about that, but that was a big door opener to a life of, well, at least in some parts of my life, listening to that band, going backwards in their catalog, and then of course forwards through the various incarnations of the group, when Roger Waters was with them, when he left them, etc.
Right. Want to start with Dark Side? First impressions. Where you were? What you first thought?
Well, I heard Money on the radio, which was the rare Pink Floyd radio hit with the censored word in it and everything. It wasn't my favorite song by any means. In fact, I thought it was kind of dirge-like, but it was enough. And it got me into buying the album. I spent a lot of my disposable income on albums in those days, and still. And it was meant to be heard as a piece. It was clearly, each side had a theme to it. The songs ran into each other often, and it took you on a journey, and not always a pleasant journey, in the sense that the topics were often dark. They were sometimes disturbing, thought-provoking. One of the key things that I heard on the album, and I keep coming back to, the song Time, when I was a kid, I was a young teenager, And I was growing up in a fairly small town, a college town in Maine, Orono. And one of the fears I had was staying in that college town and becoming a townie, as many did. And one of the lines in the Pink Floyd song was kicking around a piece of ground in your hometown, waiting for something or someone to show you the way. And that dug into my brain, and it made me think. It was like, well, exactly. That's not what you want to do. You want to take chances with your life. So just this little couplet, I mean, I don't want to overemphasize it. It wasn't a life changer. I made other decisions not based on songs, but it planted that idea in my head as a kid. And the album, of course, had many dimensions to it beyond that, but that was certainly one of them.
You played a lot. Yeah, sure. So what came next? Keep telling. After, as far as the next part in your story. So one of the things that we've talked about is you started with Dark Side. It captured you. It was a big moment, and then you were inspired to go in a different direction with them.
One of the joys was the joy of discovery back then, and of course it still is with the internet, Spotify and Deezer and all that. You can listen to anything pretty much anytime, whenever it was made, and for you pay the fee or get it for free. Back then, of course, you were buying albums and you had to search them out. And when I realized the Pink Floyd catalog, the music before Dark Side, wow, well, that was just a wonderful thing to be able to go backwards and have these albums released in the late 60s and early 70s be available to me to purchase as new albums. I'm hearing them afresh. And those albums were Adam Hartmother, Metal in particular, were much more experimental than what Dark Side of the Moon was. And it kind of opened up things even more to me about what an album could do and the various phases it could go through, a song could go through to move you in very many different ways. And finally, I mean, going backwards in time, Metal and Adam Hartmother, the soundtrack, more, we got to the very early Pink Floyd, which was Syd Barrett's band. He was the leader of it, the songwriter, the guitarist, the lead singer, and it was a very different band than from what it later became. To me, it was all new and very different, whimsical and yet dark, but playful, damaged, all kinds of different things. But he was, the legend of Syd has been discussed by many over the years. He burned out, mental illness, drug abuse, and basically had to be either, depending who you believe, either forced out of the band or quit because he simply couldn't keep his act together any longer. And he became kind of the specter that haunted the band to some degree throughout their career. And he was the subject of a lot of material that they wrote over the years. But for me, in just going back to the Syd era, the Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and it was like, again, yet another level of discovery of this band that actually was successful in England and actually had a couple of radio hits back then. See Emily Play was one of them. And then sort of going, okay, this is who they were. And then when Syd got moved out, David Gilmour, the guitarist, came in, a friend of all of the members of the band. He came into play. And he didn't assume control necessarily, but he and Roger Waters pretty much shared the main vision for the group from then on. And it became a different animal, if you will, than what it was when Syd led it.
Interesting. So a couple of questions for you. So in talking to these guys, how long do you feel that they've been dealing with, I don't know if his ghost is the right way to put it, but has Syd been just a constant presence in the history and in the efforts of the band?
Yeah, certainly, if nothing else, a thread that runs through it. I mean, the madness that is addressed on Dark Side And if the band you're in starts playing different tunes, I'll see you in the dark side of the moon. That came directly from a concert where Barrett was playing the wrong song. When they were playing, everyone else was playing a song. He just didn't know where they were and just went off on his own. So he was there in Dark Side. And of course, Dark Side does have a lot to do with mental illness. Whether it was explicitly about Syd or not, I don't know. I think in parts it was. But then following Dark Side was Wish You Were Here, where clearly Syd is the crazy diamond referenced in that lead track, sure. Shine On You Crazy Diamond. Sure. And, there's a fondness for him, missing him, and also an awareness that they wouldn't be where they were if Syd hadn't founded the band when he did and shaped it how he did, but also if he hadn't left the band, it would have probably disintegrated in his hands. So he was very integral to their initial success and their continued success. And I suppose critics could say, well, they milked the legend of Syd. I don't know. I'm not so sure. Maybe they did a little bit, but it was he. And that situation was something that was very much on their minds. And whenever I interviewed someone in the band, and the two people I talked to were David Gilmour and the keyboardist Rick Wright, it would come up. I mean, I would bring it up at least at some point when the main interview was over, or we talked about whatever album or tour they were on at the moment. And I'd say, what do you know about Syd? And this was when he was alive, of course. He's no longer with us. But he became a diabetic, a recluse, lived in his mother's basement in Cambridge, England. And the fans would sometimes go, well, he's working on material. He's really just secluded, but he's going to emerge with this brilliant record. And when I asked them, the guys in Floyd, about it, they said, no, it's a rumor, but there's no basis of truth to that. He's gone. And, it was obviously sad for them, but part of their lives. One of the interesting things, too, I know, is that Gilmour was very attentive to Syd in getting him monies from Pink Floyd royalties and paying attention to him, if not hands-on exactly. That was other family duties of the Barrett family. But he was very attentive to making sure that Syd got his cut of the money that came in that kept him alive, at least.
Right. Second, I was just curious, since we're going through the catalog a little bit here. You did mention, you said Animals. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Animals itself, as far as with theme, styling, sound.
Sure. Here, I'll show you this. This is the cover of a recent, a couple of months ago, I think it was, Prog magazine, where the cover story was Pink Floyd and Animals. And it was sort of going back into how they made it, what the mood was in the band at the time, and how incredibly dark it was. And I keep coming back to that word. I guess I'm overusing it, but it was. And it was actually, if you thought Dark Side was dark, and if you thought Wish You Were Here was dark, and The Wall, of course, if you thought that was dark, we're going to give you Animals. It gets worse. And it was all about the various layers of society and capitalism, unbridled capitalism, consumers who were sheep, dogs who were mid-level people who preyed on the sheep. And it was scary, haunting, vicious music. And successful. This is one of the things that sort of has always amazed me about Pink Floyd, is that they are certainly the most, if you will, cynical major band to have this kind of audience, meaning arenas and stadiums. They're sort of the antithesis of the band Yes, who were their contemporaries. Yes was a very positive, upbeat-minded group. And Pink Floyd gave you something that, yes, it might be something you could sing along to, but you weren't singing along to happy tunes. They were writing about things that were not so pleasant and were very disruptive. And that was, it was and still is something that's not very often seen in the mainstream of music. That's usually much on the fringes.
Was Animals critically, commercially successful? Did they care after the last two records were how it did? You're describing it as a bit of a shift right? It's a little.
Yeah, it got, yeah, they kept amping up to some degree, I think, amping it up in terms of how much can you take, you know, how much tragedy and how much darkness can you take. It was critically mixed, best I recall. It was a difficult album for a lot of people. The songs were long, you know, and even if it got FM radio play, the song, you know, often they're 8, 9, 10, 11 minute songs, hard to play on the radio, and not easy for a listener to digest either, because it went through some harrowing ups and downs in the course of this album, and things don't end well for any of the groups that are made in this record. Was it successful? Yeah, I believe it was. I mean, I'm not sure. Did it sell as much as Dark Side? No, nothing did. Did it sell as much as The Wall? No, I don't believe it did. Those would be the two commercial peaks for the band, I think, in terms of popular audience. But it still, you know, it maintained, and it was you know, something that Floyd fans certainly gravitated to, and probably saw as consistent with the band in terms of where they were headed and philosophically and musically what they were all about.
Now, you've been listening as a fan for a while. When did they have a little album, as you mentioned, little album, small little note on their history called The Wall that comes next? Did you start following them professionally at that point, or were you still a fan? Talk us through when The Wall came into play.
Let's see, fan Wall. I was still in college, and my professional, if you will, well, actually, I did start writing in college. I was a columnist for the Bangor Daily News and Sweet Potato Magazine, so I was starting to write about music back then.
Yep.
In terms of dealing with them on a higher level, I guess, when I started work at the Boston Globe, that was when I ended up doing reviews and interviews with David and Rick and covering the band. So yes, I mean, The Wall, it was, you know, I encountered it purely first off as a fan, and then I later did some writing about it. And of course, it's something that Roger Waters, who left the band very acrimoniously, continued to tour for quite some time. I've seen various versions of him staging that, you know, not under the Pink Floyd name. He doesn't use that any longer. In fact, Pink Floyd doesn't exist any longer. They finally kind of pretty much said that, yes, we're not here anymore.
Right.
And the drummer, Nick Mason, continues on with a version, doing some of their earlier material. Rick Wright is deceased. And Gilmour, I think, even recently just said, you know, I mean, let's face it, I mean, we are not going to be putting out any new music as Pink Floyd.
Gilmour, I know, has a beautiful boat and has been recording in a state-of-the-art studio on that boat. But yeah,
it's done some gorgeous stuff. I mean, that was
really
you know, the thing about, you know, the creative balance between Gilmour and Waters was very integral to what they did, and I think in general, Waters shaped the music, and he was the primary lyricist on almost everything. Gilmour's weakness is lyrics, as he's admitted. I mean, he has people come in to write for him when it comes to writing lyrics. His strength is an amazing guitar player. And so it was Waters' strengths in that respect, Gilmour's strengths kind of coming together. And I mean, obviously they shared a certain mindset about what they wanted to do. I think Roger probably pulled them in a more harrowing direction than maybe Gilmour would have. On Gilmour's solo albums, you know, they were, you know, had a fair share of despair as well, but not as wrenching as Roger's versions.
For sure. And your thoughts on The Wall?
I love pretty much 3/4 of it. I think the final side, or where it all sort of either comes together or falls apart, does not work musically or thematically. I think Roger got just too full of himself and full of the story. And it just, without going into the, you know, deep critical details, which frankly I can't recall off the top of my head, I just remember kind of going, this is great, this is great, this is great, and then going, now it's kind of going off the deep end here, it's not working. However, you know, song-wise, I mean, just the story of this boy who's becomes a rock star and becomes a fascist and becomes this all powerful but drug damaged and megalomaniac. Not the easiest person to relate to, but he had a horrible childhood, as did Roger Waters, whose father was killed in World War II. And you could kind of see where he was building from this character, Pink. And you knew, again, things weren't going to end well, and they hadn't begun well. So I guess there's some consistency in that. But it's a very dramatic album. Comfortably Numb comes from that, one of their best known songs.
Sure.
I was listening to it today there's a new-ish live album recorded, I think in '91 in Nebworth. I just came out, and listening to Comfortably Numb for the millionth time or something like that. It's still a very moving song. What can I say? I mean, the guitar work in that is just so beautiful. And, the theme of somebody being unreachable due to whatever illness they have, mental illness, being in a fog and being unable to come out of it. And it's a very resonant story. And it's, frankly, I mean, it's one I can relate to with my mother, who had dementia last year of her life. And I could see in that song in later years how she was not the person she used to be, and how she may be looking out at the world from the kind of point of view of that character in the song. So just to say, I mean, songs have different resonances at different points in your life. And that one became quite personal to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's Gilmour. So a couple things. So Gilmour's tone is what so many people talk about. The emotion in Waters' lyrics is what so many people talk about. And it's an amazing thing, as we've prepared for just to talk tonight this way, to go back and re-listen to these things and find, as a wannabe guitar player, to go back and listen to that, to the way that Gilmour played, and then to put my heart into the threads that Waters was trying to weave or weaving successfully, depending on how you ask it. It's compelling stuff.
Well, what's interesting too, Johnny, is when Waters and Floyd split, Waters continued to do these mega tours with other guitarists. Eric Clapton was a side guitarist at one point. But yeah, that was the pros and cons of Hitchhiking Tour, whatever year that was. Clapton was there as a sideman guitarist. And no, he didn't play viola or anything else. He stuck to the program. But here was the interesting thing, and I think fans of Gilmour always like to point this out. They'll say that when Waters went on tour and had to have people replicate Gilmour's sound, he had no fewer than 3 guitarists on board to do that. So, in other words, it may look simple, but it ain't. It's hard.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
All right, so let's keep moving through to what we're talking about here. The Final Cut came next. What thoughts on Final Cut?
That would have been the point where I said, enough is enough. This really should be the final cut. It was the final cut with Waters. I mean, the band continued with the Division Bell. Also not a great album. That was Gilmour steering the ship, and it was pretty mediocre. The final cut was just the flaws of Pink Floyd, the bombast, and, the self-absorption and anger. Just became too much, and the songs were, to my way of thinking, not as well crafted, didn't have the kind of power that previous material had. There was one exception on that, a wonderful song called Not Now, John, which I highly recommend you YouTube and listen to. There's a great video of it up there. And I mean, it ranks with any of their best songs. And I play it frequently, and I never play anything else from the album itself. And that one was pretty much filed, not long after release for me.
So, good question here for you. Can you reflect on how Pink Floyd might resonate with today's generation?
How they would relate to today's generation, or
how Pink Floyd might resonate with today's generation. From listening, from the themes, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, well, I guess the themes of trying to dealing with a world you don't understand, and maybe dealing with a world where you feel like the odds are stacked against you. this was a lot of what Pink Floyd dealt with, was the little man who did not have the power that the others had, and sort of being a continual search for some power or voice. I would think that theme would have some resonance now. It's interesting to me how a young person would deal with the music first time around, because it obviously comes from a different era, different time frame. To me, it's got the timeless / classic kind of feel to it. But to somebody listening to it for the first time, just the sound and the shape of it, it would have to feel pretty strange, I would think. And I would hope that the person would be curious enough to go, okay, this isn't, I don't know this kind of thing, but maybe there's something here that I can relate to. And as I said, I think there are some sentiments that are pretty universal, and hopefully that would translate.
That's great. I mean, who when you think about their influence on the music that followed, I mean, I don't even know if you could hone it in on who are some of the prime candidates, right? Because you've got the instrumentation, and then you've got themes, right? But are there any who are the, for lack of a better term, their children musically, right? Who when you think of their children, who might you recommend?
The most notable one would be Steve Wilson and Porcupine Tree, I think. Okay. In fact, I mean, he wears the mantle of, well, I'm not even sure how old he is now. I guess he's probably in his 40s. But he wears the mantle of somebody who was raised on this stuff and just loves it, and has taken what's been done by Floyd and King Crimson and Genesis and other bands from that era and put it into his own music in a very creative way. So he would be he and his band would be the main person, I would say. But I'm not familiar with all the many other bands. When I was looking through that magazine I showed you, Prague, they were dealing with a myriad of newer bands that, obviously had some connection to the Floyd or these older prog rock bands. And I'm going, wow, don't know that, have to look that up. And I haven't really done a deep dig yet, but they're out there. I mean, that's the interesting thing is, I mean, there's a subset of prog rock that is still thriving, at least to some degree, hence a big glossy magazine in England that we can get over here as well. It may not dominate, it may not be part of the conversation that most young people have, but it is still out there. And the searching can is in some ways much easier to do now with the internet and the various streams that you can discover music on.
Well, that's true. So I can't help but ask if you have any favorite stories of meeting the band members. I mean, you've talked to, is it 2 or 3 of them?
Yeah, Rick and David. Never met Waters. Probably wanted to, I guess, although I probably would be maybe a little intimidated by him because he has a reputation for being a bit of a surly cuss. Actually, I've got one of the clips from talking to Gilmour, and this was about an anniversary. I think it's the 20th anniversary of the release of Dark Side of the Moon, 1993. And I said, the question was, so did you think you were working on a classic, or what would be a classic back when you did this thing in 73? And he kind of laughed and he said, I don't know what you mean by a classic, but we certainly thought it was going to be a goodie. We certainly thought it would outsell anything we tried to sell before. And due to the packaging and the music and the lyrics, the whole thing together, it seemed to have a thing to it that we knew would be better than anything previous. We'd actually performed it live quite a few times on stage before we recorded it. And the fact that we'd done it live quite a few times meant that when we recorded it, we were all playing rather well. And yeah, I mean, that was, it was interesting too, because when I went into the story writing about their, the celebration of the success of the album and the remastered version of it, I kind of asked, is this album, the success of it, in any way kind of an albatross around your necks, because it's what people identify you with? And again, he kind of laughed and said, well, it's something I deal with quite well. No, it's not a problem. And obviously it made the band rich beyond belief. Yeah. And gave them the freedom to do whatever else they wanted to do. One of the other things about Gilmour, too, that I really liked, this was a subsequent interview. I'd asked him about current music, and he kind of took a pass, and he said, I'm just not that up on it. I'm just not out there. And he said, when I'm not on stage, I'm not really out in the world that much as a public figure either. He said, I'm not that identifiable, and I can mix and mingle with people on a level where I'm not treated as some sort of rock star. And he said, in some ways, that is a real freedom that he had that Paul McCartney said he didn't have. There was a certain anonymity, even with their mega fame, that he felt that he had, and that enabled him to just kind of go about his business as sort of an ordinary guy. So.
Well, last question for you.
Sure.
So we've obviously been going through some challenging times in the world. How have you been digesting music, listening to music over these times, since there's no live shows to see? Bands aren't pumping out records the way that they used to. Are you following anything current, anything interesting that you would recommend, or that you've been playing on heavy rotation while you've been home? Other than Dark Side, of course.
Yeah, it's funny. The answer to that story throughout my life, especially professional life, often is, well, what I've been working on. In other words, if I'm reviewing something, I'll dig into that band's latest album or catalog. And so without that happening, honestly, I've been sort of combing through a lot of the past, if you will. I am not terribly enamored of the music scene today. Not to sound like an old fart, but it's not intended for me either. Nor you. I mean, I'm not sure. I'll ask the question to you too. I mean, are there things that are current that you're listening to that compare with like an REM or band or a Pearl Jam, bands that you really dug when you were younger?
A band that you might that I discovered. I've been spending a lot of the NPR music podcasts, and Dry Cleaning has this sort of no wave spoken word female vocal thing that has just been it's been in heavy rotation. It's been a lot of fun. They've got that really sort of I'm trying to think of some examples off the top of my head in the moment that remind me, but they've just that 4-piece band out of Britain. They met in art school and they've just exploded, and they have a new album out that I have just been playing over and over and over again, trying to get my son to enjoy it. But this girl with that sort of monotone vocal, not quite, not processed like Susie might have been. It was, but they've got that PJ Harvey guitar.
Oh, great.
A lot more complex, but a lot less of the in it. It's like beat poetry set to the jangly like late 70s, early 80s guitar. It's just great. It's really
a
rocking,
good description. Yeah.
Really rocking stuff. Yeah. So cool. Well, thank you very much for being here. We're gonna wrap things up. Got a couple of nice questions in, and I appreciate you taking your time to join us tonight. So big thank you to our guest, Jim Sullivan, for volunteering to be here with us. And
thanks for having me, John. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it as well. And thank you as always to John Monahan for helping out behind the scenes. Next month, we have a 2-part episode on music and social justice. Part 1 is happening on Sunday, the 16th at 7:30 on our Facebook page, and it will feature Boston College professor Shannon Jacob Dorman. I'm not going to tell you about part 2. You got to tune in and watch. We hope that when each of our episodes is over, you'll think a little bit differently about a style of music that has never interested you before. Maybe you'll listen to a new playlist a little bit longer, and maybe, just maybe, you'll pick up that instrument you've always wondered about. If you enjoyed our program and are interested in taking a lesson or a class with our school, we have posted our contact information on our Facebook page. It should be up there, and on our website, the dedhamschoolofmusic.org, has all our classes. We can't wait to meet you. If you're interested in supporting our school and programming like this, great guests about like Jim, we've done our best to make it as easy as possible. There's a donate button at the top of the page. Thank you. We are grateful for your support. If you want to watch this episode with Jim again, do not fear. We should have it up on YouTube in all its glory within the next couple of days. And we thank you for tuning in. And I appreciate your help this evening, Jim, and sharing some stories. I'm going to sign off from our live stream and see you all next time. Thank you very much.